Hey guys, today we're talking about the Gilded Age, which is a time period within period six that's like 1869 to 1889. It's called the Gilded Age because of the word gilded, and we'll get into that in a minute. But gilded means plated in gold. So on the surface, this means that this time period was full of opulence and wealth and all those things. But the term Gilded Age was actually coined by Mark Twain, and it was meant to be satirical. Mark Twain's one of the best satire writers of this century. And so the idea of an age being gilded or a time period being gilded in gold, he was saying it satirically. For some people, it is gold plated, it is full of opulence and wealth. But for the majority of Americans, it was not. So keep that in mind that the Gilded Age is actually a satirical term. So, Ulysses S. Grant is president elected. He was one of the most popular figures to emerge from the Civil War, and he was elected in 1868. People are ready to just put the Civil War at rest. This was in the middle of a time period of Reconstruction where Congress was kind of taking control of Reconstruction and the radical Republicans. And he was kind of seen as more of an apolitical character. He wasn't super involved in politics prior to being in the military, and then he was. He is also, in my own personal opinion, one of the most attractive presidents, which is why there's a heart there. We can have that debate later on in class, but he is our 18th president, and he runs on the platform of continuing military reconstruction. He is elected due to the idea of what's called waving the bloody shirt, which is a U.S. history term that pops up here and every now and then. Basically, waving the bloody shirt is the idea that you revive the memories of the war or whatever hard thing you went through, and that it brought you to today, and that's why you're running and you're going to help America, like that sort of thing. So you revive, for him, he's reviving the gory memories of the war and what he did to help our nation, and that makes people think like, oh, he's a good guy. He helped us through the war, okay? So what happens, though, during Grant's presidency is he just kind of allows a bunch of corruption and greed and scandals to kind of manifest, and he doesn't really do much about them in terms of prosecution. So one of these corruption-filled schemes was called the Golden Fist Scheme. And basically, it's these two financiers that persuade President Grant, they're also involved in politics, to make the federal treasury refrain from selling gold. So their idea was if they then could sell gold, then it's in shorter supply, and they can bid the price up, sell that gold off and make a bunch of money. Full of corruption. It's like government inside trading, essentially. The Treasury finally released gold, and then like this big bubble burst, kind of like the housing bubble in 2008. There's over speculation. There's inflated stock prices. Essentially, these two guys are busted, but Grant doesn't get in trouble because the congressional Senate hearings found that he had nothing to do with the actual selling of the gold and making money. He just acted kind of irresponsibly in letting these two cronies convince him to do something. Okay? We also have more political corruption, and this is in New York City, local New York City politics, which became a huge political machine. Now, a political machine is when there is a political group that is able to control elections through unfair practices like paying people off and bribing, where basically they get to choose who gets elected and who doesn't because they control the votes. So this is happening in New York City. It's called the Tweed Ring. The man William Boss Tweed, and the leader of a political machine is often called a boss. He uses bribery, graft, fraudulent elections, and paying people off to get who he wants elected into office. And the New York Times actually kind of exposes him in 1871, and his name is Thomas Nast. And we're going to be going over this in class together. But essentially, Thomas Nast is a cartoonist, and he drew all these political cartoons, which I'm going to show you in class, of Boss Tweed, and showing that he's stealing from the U.S. Treasury. He's bribing people with votes. He has New York City completely under control, and people need to wake up. He is abusing and exploiting immigrants who need food and clothing, and that's kind of what his political machine offers to them in exchange for votes. Actually, the political machine itself bribes Thomas Nast, offering him $100,000, which was a lot more back then than it is now, to go study art in Paris and just like get out of here and go away, stop drawing cartoons. But he refused, despite some even higher offers from different sectors of the political machine. And actually, because of Thomas Nast exposing this corruption in the New York Times and his political cartoons, Boss Tweed and the political machine will be broken up. And a senator prosecutes Boss Tweed, and he was sent to jail. He escaped. He got back out. He got put back into jail, and then he died in jail. So it's a very interesting story. We're going to skip through those. We're going to go through these in class. Here we go. Another scandal that happened during the Grant era is the Credit Mobilier scandal. It's French, so really it's probably Mobilier, but we're going to say Credit Mobilier scandal. Basically, it's a railroad construction company that was formed it was like birthed by the Union Pacific Railway, which had a big part in building the Transcontinental Railroad. So they break off and create this little baby company underneath the umbrella of the Union Pacific Railway. Well, the government during this time period was paying private companies to build railroads for the government, giving them land, giving them incentives, giving them money, signing government contracts. So the Credit Mobilier Union Pacific was given the task of finding a railroad company to sign a government contract. They hired themselves to build the railroad and paid themselves big bucks through the ruse of their hiring this other railroad company. In order, they paid their stock dividends that they paid to themselves were 348% more. Like they are getting a bunch of money from this off the stock market and from the government. They distributed some of that money to congressmen to bribe them into silence. They bribed the vice president, they bribed the secretary of the treasury, and they bribed some senators and representatives. Grant wasn't directly involved, but his reputation is tarnished because here we are with another scandal that's going on that the federal government happened right underneath their nose. And it kind of tarnished his reputation in a sense. And then we have the whiskey ring, which is another scandal. In 1875, it is discovered that the whiskey ring, which was a group of whiskey makers, had robbed millions of dollars from the government by not paying their taxes. So essentially, there's a whiskey tax, an excise tax. Remember, excise tax means kind of like a sin tax. They tax you on things that they know that you're going to buy, like gasoline or cigarettes. Well, whiskey is one of those things during this time period. And these whiskey producers knew that if they talked to the tax agents and paid them off a little bit, then the tax agents would say, oh yeah, they paid their taxes, or they paid all their taxes, even if it was only a portion. And the whiskey people benefited because they had to pay less taxes, and the tax collectors benefited because they got paid off. But the federal government is being robbed of money that should have been taxed. Okay. So, Grant, when he finds out about this, is quoted as saying, "Let no man escape." Okay, so this is the scandal that I'm really going to care about. This is the scandal where everyone's going to jail that was involved. However, one of Grant's own cabinet members was involved in the scandal. And Grant actually wrote a statement to the jury that put many of these tax collectors, federal tax agents, on trial, asking them to find the tax agents not guilty. So he just is a bystander in all this corruption and all these scandals. Oh, there you go. Make sure you write that down, okay? All right, so underneath the fabric of all these scandals and political things and Reconstruction still continuing, there is a panic, a financial panic. Remember, a panic is not as bad as a depression, but it's getting there. It's a time period of recessions, okay? And it actually sends the United States into a greater depression. Not the Great Depression, but a greater depression. So the causes of the Panic of 1873 is overproduction of railroads, of mines, of factories. We've taken out so many loans. We are creating so many things that we're flooding the market. And when you flood the market, there's an oversupply. You have to decrease prices. Companies are making less, so there's an issue. There's the idea of over-speculation and risky loans too. Many loans, companies were giving out loans hoping that those people would make it rich and pay back their money plus interest, but many loans went unpaid, and that means the banking system collapses because they lost money and they didn't gain a profit on interest. They didn't get that money back. They didn't get a profit on interest. And when banks fail, then businesses start failing because businesses often have a revolving credit and revolving loans with banks. The depreciation of Civil War era greenbacks also caused this panic. So that paper money that was issued during the Civil War to finance the war all of a sudden doesn't have as much value. And it resulted in people saying, well, we should be using soft money, paper money anyway. We should only be buying things in silver and gold or cash backed up by silver and gold. And so the Treasury is trying to deal with the greenback issue. Hard money advocates are attempting to stop the issuing of paper money that is not backed by gold and silver metal deposits, okay? So here's the idea of that greenback issue. So to stimulate growth, oftentimes the government will expand the economy, and that also expands prices, which is inflation. When prices go up, but the amount of money that people are making doesn't go up at the same rate, that's called inflation. And we've also got this huge industrialization push where tons of things are being produced. Well, if there's tons of things on the market, then the price goes down. We just covered that. So we're having a hard money, should we have to buy things in gold and silver and cash backed by that, or soft money issue? Can the Treasury be able to manipulate the amount of money on the market through printing, the Treasury taking back money out of supply and things like that? So debtors, people that are in debt, want inflation, right? They want the money supply to increase because they owe $20,000. And if they can get their hands on $20,001 bills, even if they're not really worth $1, woohoo, they pay their loans back. So debtors really want that inflation, that soft money, or sometimes backed by silver. Things backed by gold are just more resolute in how much it's actually worth, okay? So the Bland-Allison Act, or the Grand-Bland Plan, it was sometimes called that, in 1878 was a compromise where the government would try and find the middle ground between hard money and soft money. The government would buy and coin between $2 to $4 million per month. So buy up that paper money and have it backed by silver and put out in real silver coins and release that into circulation. And that is worth what that is, and that worth doesn't change like soft money changes in its value. And so the economy grew, the currency in circulation didn't really keep up with the pace of that. And so prices actually ended up lowering as well. And that's why it didn't solve the issue. It just kind of delayed it further. Okay. So all of this stems a whole political party. It's so confusing, the hard money versus soft money thing. And if you don't understand, you're completely lost. It is okay. Just know that hard money is currency backed by gold or silver that holds its value a lot better. And soft money is the paper money that the government's able to manipulate a lot more. So soft money advocates put together in 1878 the Greenback Labor Party. And they actually get 14 members elected to Congress. And many of them are farmers, and farmers are often very in debt to banks. And remember, debtors are the ones that want soft money so that they can pay back their debts, but they're not actually paying back the full value of their debts because money has depreciated in value. And they are able to elect some members to Congress. The Depression, this whole panic depression era, ends in 1879, so it only lasts about 6 years. And the currency issue kind of dies with it, the hard money versus soft money thing, but it will come back. So remember this hard money versus soft money debate. It'll come back around 1890. All right, so when we're looking at politics beyond, my face is over his. When we're looking at politics beyond Ulysses S. Grant, we're looking at what some historians like to call the forgettable presidents: Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, and Harrison. And really, the only reason that you've heard of Hayes is Rutherford B. Hayes is the end of Reconstruction issue. And we're going to just define these 4 presidents by 4 things: corruption, bribery, spoil system, and expanding the power of the government. And that's kind of what happens during these time periods. So it's a highly competitive political time period, but politicians were extremely cautious not to be too divisive, in order to not split parties even further. So on the Republicans' side, they kind of stressed strict moral codes, and a person's morality and their morals has to do with whether or not they should be elected, so that kind of thing. They want the government to be involved in regulating morality, so like prohibition issues, those sort of things, and like tougher on crime. They have heavy support from businessmen, heavy support from the Midwest and small towns, heavy support from African Americans as well. And the reason being is that Republican was the party of Lincoln, and they will hold on. That people group will block vote for Republican for a very long time, until 1932. And they also had this big propensity to elect very wealthy leaders. Whereas the Democrats consisted of many immigrants, many Lutherans and Catholics, many Irishmen and German men, and they also drew a lot of support from the South, that solid South, and some industrial cities where immigrants live. And this party is wrought with political machines because of immigrants being exploited by political machines in big cities. So it gets even worse. There's so much patronage and bribery and spoil system within politics at this time that the Republican Party breaks down into different factions. And I'm going to go through what some of those factions are right now. So, the Republican factions are the stalwarts, the half-breeds, and the mugwumps. And every year, I think this reminds me of Harry Potter. They sound like Harry Potter words. The stalwarts were often wealthier, and they believed that the spoils system kept the government going and had more people involved in the government than would likely be involved, because politicians can bring in people that aren't politicians, like businessmen. So they are pro-spoil system. Half-breed, let's go mugwumps. Mugwumps on the right there. Oftentimes, they're represented by Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a mugwump. He was a Republican who favored large reforms. Lots of them are young and liberal, like Thomas Nast. Lots of them favored Reconstruction policies that helped African Americans rather than focusing on bringing the South in. They wanted to focus on helping freedmen in the South. And most of them were anti-corruption, get rid of political machines, get rid of the spoil system. Half-breeds are in the middle. They favor civil service reform, but there is a wealthy faction or a wealthy part within the half-breeds that favor some parts of the spoil system. Civil service reform means how are we choosing who is involved in civil service, working for the government, okay? All right, so the election of 1876 and 1877, we've done this before. I'm going to quickly summarize it for you, and you're going to write it down. Basically, we have Republicans nominated Rutherford B. Hayes. Democrats nominated Samuel Tilden, who was part of a big spoil system thing with Boss Tweed, actually. Tilden won a majority of popular votes, but there were some electoral votes that were in contention. There was election fraud in South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana that resulted in a commission created to try and determine who would win the election. And this is the Compromise of 1877. Hayes, who was the Republican nomination, who didn't have enough electoral votes to win, is given the rest of the electoral votes from Louisiana and South Carolina if he promises to withdraw federal troops from the South and end Reconstruction. So the Democrats get the end to Reconstruction, and the Democrats are largely in the South, and the Republicans get the presidency. So it officially ended Reconstruction and started this time period in the South where Blacks are repeatedly discriminated against even more, and there's zero protections for them. So basically, the Republican Party sacrificed the African American community in the South to win the presidency, and then Hayes did almost nothing to help them. So it was not a great moment in U.S. history, okay? And we've looked at that before. We're going to move on. All right, the election of 1880, I'm like zooming through these presidents because they do basically nothing. Garfield and Arthur is the next time period. So James Garfield is a Republican. He wins against the Democrat Winfield Hancock. They were both Civil War officers, but Garfield is assassinated 4 months in. So he is the second president at this point to leave office, not by will, okay, to be, third, right? We've had a president die, president be assassinated. This is the second president to be assassinated. So Garfield is assassinated by a stalwart. Garfield was a half-breed, a Republican, and a stalwart named James Gautier, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, follows him to a train station. Back in the day, they didn't have Secret Service. Even after the whole Lincoln was assassinated thing, they still didn't have Secret Service and they published what the president was doing. Like, the president is going upstate to have vacation with his family and things. I don't know why I did a British accent, but things like that they would publish. And people would be like, oh, I'm involved in the life of the president. And that's the reason they publish it, to make the president seem relatable. Well, it was published that he was going on vacation upstate with his family, or something like that. And Charles Gautier follows him to the train station and shoots him. And James Garfield dies later. When he shoots him, he says, I am a stalwart. Arthur is now president. And Charles Gautier was just, in the end of his life, he was just crazy, and he had these visions where he was supposed to be given a position through the spoil system to be in the government, even though he had no real connections to politicians. So now Vice President Arthur, who was a stalwart, is president. And Charles Gautier's idea was, now he's going to give me a position, just kind of like a harebrained scheme here. All right, so 1883, actually, the Pendleton Act is passed, and the Pendleton Act aims to stop the corruption and the spoil system that's going on. So it prohibited hiring office holders based on wealth. So you can't say you have to have a minimum income or this type of job in order to hold office. And it established a merit system. And merit means you have to have requirements in order to get this position. You can't just get this position because you know someone that can give it to you. Okay. And it creates the Civil Service Commission. And the Civil Service Commission is charged with administering open examinations, competitive applications for government classified offices. Okay. So in 1884, when this happens, 10% of offices were considered classified, where you had to have certain merits, and you had to like swear an oath and keep your job secret and things like, not secret, but like swear an oath to the government and swear an oath against corruption. And 100 years later, 90% of government offices were classified, meaning the civil service reform really helped. It did change the government system, the federal system, where you have to have certain qualifications to get government jobs, so that we're not just hiring yahoos off the street who have no political experience or no experience in what they're hired. Okay, the election of 1884, we have James Blaine, the Republican nominee, and we have Grover Cleveland as a Democrat nominee. The Grover Cleveland was mayor of Buffalo. He was governor of New York. He was seen as a reformer who was going to stand up to big railroad companies, which is a thing that we're going to get to here soon, how the government should regulate railroads. And his platform was seen with honesty and efficiency in government. However, there's some mudslinging during this election. Remember, mudslinging is when they try and talk about the bad parts of a candidate's personal life in order to get them not elected. So Grover Cleveland kind of had this secret, essentially, that Cleveland was supposedly the father of an illegitimate child who is now 8 years old. And the mother said that she had relations with Cleveland, and that he put her in this mental institute. So here's kind of what really happened, what historians have gathered, what might have happened is that Grover Cleveland was a single guy. He was hanging out with all these married men, and this woman who hung out in, I guess a lot of women hung out with him, but this woman who hung out in that crowd of important officials, and most of them were married, Grover Cleveland was the only single guy. And whether or not he was the father of the child, he did take ownership of it later to kind of save his buddies, who might have been the father of the child. So there's just this huge, oh my gosh, he says he's this reformer, he says he's this moral guy, and there's this thing. And the woman was put in a mental institute. She said it was Grover Cleveland's doing. But he is elected. Grover Cleveland, the Democrat, is elected versus the lesser-known Republican. And the Democrats who had been assailed because of Grover Cleveland's personal life, oh, here's a political cartoon, were heard chanting at his inauguration this term, "Ma, ma, where's my paw? Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha." Basically saying, like, you tried to get us with this whole illegitimate child thing, and guess what? We still won. Kind of like that. And there's a political cartoon showing the illegitimate child. Okay. All right, so Grover Cleveland is a staunch believer in laissez-faire. Laissez-faire means hands off. The government should be hands off from free market economic practices. There's an issue with military pensions where Civil War veterans were being abused through loopholes that allowed able-bodied veterans to get more money and claims than veterans who had actually been wounded in the Civil War. So that's an economic issue. Tariffs are going to become a huge issue where Republicans are more okay with tariffs because they protect local business, but Democrats aren't, which is kind of weird with the whole laissez-faire thing. But Cleveland actually passes lower tariffs, which help make the Democrats like him even more. And then the Dawes Act, the Dawes Severalty Act of 1887, which broke up Native American land, made tribes not a legal entity, and tried to assimilate Native Americans into white culture. All right, so overall, let's look at themes of the Gilded Age, things that we've talked about, this age of corruption where lots of people are living in opulent wealth, but there's lots of economic, political, and social issues, okay? So hard money versus soft money is the idea of should our currency be backed by gold and silver pieces? Should it be bought up by the government and coined into gold or silver pieces, or should it remain paper money that is easier to manipulate but has the risk of inflation? The idea of corruption, how much can the government regulate itself to stop corruption from happening? Industrialization, which we're going to get to next. The second industrial revolution hits during this time period, and what machines and inventions and what those things, what jobs and social situations those things create. The idea of a split between agrarian or more rural focus-based America to a more urban-based America where most people live in cities instead of in the country, which isn't the case yet, but it's starting during this time period due to the second industrial revolution. New immigration, where a bunch of new immigrants come from Southern and Eastern Europe, and most of them live in cities and work in factories. Unions and labor reform, which we're going to look at this week as well, where people working in the lower classes feel abused and exploited, and they are, by the owners and managers and CEOs of these huge companies that are exploiting poor labor and paying people less because they're African American or they're an immigrant or they're a woman, or just paying anybody a dirt poor wage. Okay. The last West, that short time period of westward expansion where there's nothing out there and there's no states, and the Native Americans, there's Native American conflict, and mining and cattle raising and farming is a new thing. And then social stratification, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. All of this happens right after the time period that we've discussed politically, the Gilded Age. All of the industrialization causes social stratification. All right. Thanks, guys.